what an amazing day of companies. It really makes me really feel bullish about Southern California. And I'm a tech guy, not a biotech guy, and this group today really had me super excited. So congratulations to the team. Thank you to our judges. I think it really makes these conversations a lot more interesting, and I know I learned a lot by their great questions. I'd like to now, as part of our program, I should say that we love to finish each day with a kind of a conversation with leading venture capitalists who are in this space. The good news is you've had some great transparency to what VCs and investors are thinking throughout the day, but it's always nice just to have an intense roundtable discussion with a number of VCs who cover the space. So we're going to do that today. I wanted to introduce our host and moderator, Mory Gharib, who is, I would say, a personal friend, a highly respected academic from Caltech, an incredible entrepreneur. I got a chance to work with him over the years, but also he served on the board of the Southern California Alliance, which, as you know, is our lead host today. I wanted to introduce Mory a little bit, but I didn't want to use all of our time because when you've accomplished as much as he has, it could be quite lengthy. What I would say is he's involved in a number of centers and degrees in aeronautics from Caltech, an expert in fluidics, biomechanics. The part I like most as I started reading about his awards, and once again, that would fill a page, so I'll just say he's been very recognized for his work. And he's published more than 250 papers and holds more than 116 patents. He's a founder of a company called Kairos, which had a $1 billion exit. So you're going to get interviewed, our panelists, by an entrepreneur, not a VC. His latest startup is Typhoon, if I pronounce that, or Typhoon, I don't know if I pronounced that right, Mory, which is coming out of the CAS Center, which is a heavy lift drone. And I think one of the challenges when deciding how to put Mory to work in our program today is he could have been just as relevant in our tech day tomorrow as in our biotech day today. So with that, I'd love to turn over the investor panel to Mory in our group of investors. Thank you, Mory, for being here, and thank you for hosting the conversation.
Well, good afternoon, Andy, and thank you very much for inviting me. I would like to apologize for losing my voice. Some of the panelists perhaps noticed that we have pretty heavy smoke around our area. I live in Altadena, so I hope it doesn't increase. First, I would like to thank our panelists also. I would start by asking each one of them to introduce themselves. And then we go around and we have a series of questions, and then it's going to be an open discussion, and also in the process, we can receive some questions from audience that I will check the chat room and try to bring it up to the attention of our panelists. So let's just start with Nancy. Would you like to introduce yourself?
And I hope there are at least a few attendees from the earlier life science sessions. They may have already heard this introduction. Maybe I'll try to switch it up a little bit.
Okay, so
awesome to hear, to have the moderator be from Caltech, because that's actually where I was an undergrad, Reddick House, way back in the 80s. So always happy to talk to my alum, because it's a relatively small school, as many people know. So the network is small but mighty. And I did my bachelor's there in biology, then moved up to Berkeley, where I did my PhD in molecular immunology. I jumped across the bay to UCSF to do my postdoctoral work with Mike Bishop in cancer biology, and then finally moved down to San Diego, where I've been for the past 20 years. I spun myself out to a startup biotech, venture capital backed. And that's where I really got my first taste for, this translational medicine and commercialization, and really where the business meets the science, and kind of got hooked. And then went over to a venture capital firm, and RiverVest is actually the third firm that I've worked for. I've been there 4.5 years now. I'm a managing director. We have another partner here in San Diego, Niall O'Donnell. And then the rest of my firm is located in St. Louis. And so we do early stage life science investing. We're investing to get a board seat. And we do a lot in oncology, rare diseases. And then we have a very active medical device practice as well. So if people are looking for early stage medical device investors, please contact me. So great to be here. Thanks, Mory.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we go to Alice.
Well, thanks for having me. So I serve as a principal at Alexandria Venture Investments, which is our strategic arm that invests in early stage, a seed and early stage companies, both in the life sciences and ag tech. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Alexandria, I was a scientist by training, and all I knew of Alexandria was it's a real estate company. But we are a real estate company that specializes in life sciences. So we build buildings, we own the buildings, we operate the buildings, and we don't really just think of it as buildings. We think of it as like a innovation cluster. So for us, we think about all the different stakeholders that involved. Of course, we want the most exciting companies within our portfolio, but for us, it's like, who are the other stakeholders that are required? Because this entrepreneurship is hard, right? I think as a scientist, I thought all we needed was the science when I was a PhD student. And then you quickly realize as you enter this world that the science is of course necessary, but there's so many other factors and facets that are required to kind of, lead to success. In terms of our regions, we're scattered around the country. We have about 30 million square feet of space around the country. We have some space in Los Angeles. So of course, if you're interested in that, please reach out to me. I'll connect you to the right people. As I mentioned, I studied neurobiology. I got in developmental neurobiology from Yale. I studied in UC Irvine, so there's some Southern California ties as well, but I currently lead the portfolio up in Seattle. And Hallie, who many of you may know, and if you don't know, definitely when she's back from her leave, you guys should all reach out. But Alexandria is a small company, so reach out to any of one of us and we'll make sure you're the right person.
I just want to mention that actually my third company, I was part of Alexandria and Hill Avenue.
Yeah. Once you're in,
unfortunately, they bought it and moved it to Germany, so I couldn't move it.
Well, we're just waiting for you to start the next one, so just let us know.
Thank you. Gladys?
Sorry, just getting off mute. Hi, everyone. My name is Gladys Nunez. I'm a principal in the Amgen Ventures team. I'm actually based in the Cambridge, Massachusetts area here, working from home these days like everybody else. Essentially, I'm in charge of diligence on new investments, and I run Amgen's seed fund. I know Amgen is very much involved with your organization. Prior to joining Amgen Ventures, I was in business development, and I also am a pharmacologist by training, working at both Amgen and AstraZeneca. I was on the judging panel earlier today, and I think that this is a great event, and I really appreciate the opportunity to see a lot of the innovative work going on in Southern California. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Sean?
Yes, hi, I'm Sean Harper. I'm a physician scientist trained in medical school here in San Francisco, and then spent a lot of time in Boston at Mass General and MIT, then Merck and Amgen, where ultimately over the years I became head of R&D there until I retired from that position about 2 years ago to co-found Westlake Village Biopartners with Beth Seidenberg, my partner, and the rest of our team. And we are very active in building companies, primarily here in California, largely in this part of California, in the Westlake Village area. And in fact, are working closely with Alexandria doing that. And we are very focused on human therapeutics. So really, we just are kind of old school venture capital, human therapeutics. All of us, myself, Beth, and Desmond, have that R&D background. Each of us worked 25, 30 years in the industry as operators, and that's kind of what we focus on, is primarily incubations, creating seed, and then leading Series A, and developing companies through either models where we license technology out of institutions like a Caltech, for example, UCLA, or anywhere really the IP can come from. And we also sometimes start companies with teams that can do de novo kind of drug discovery work. And we also sometimes we have companies that license deprioritized assets out of biopharma to start up companies. So there's several different models that we use.
Thank you. Next, let's go to Steve. Steve, you're on mute. Okay, maybe it's not there. How about Alex?
Hey, Mory, good afternoon. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having us, Andy and team. Very happy to support the SoCal Alliance. I'm Alex Andrianopolous. I'm the Chief R&D Officer of Kairos Ventures. Kairos Ventures is a relatively new VC firm here in Southern California. We are based out of Los Angeles. And as a matter of fact, this office here that I'm in is just next door to the Caltech campus. So very happy to be talking to you, Mory. You've been very instrumental in helping us fund entrepreneurs coming out of Caltech and other universities. Our focus is exclusively in funding scientific innovations that have been produced in university labs across the nation. After years, if not decades, of hard work and research by PIs and their teams, we invest in both life sciences and physical sciences opportunities, and we like to invest early. We understand there are many challenges that PIs are faced when they seek capital, and we try to alleviate those challenges by offering them not only financial capital, but also human capital, and helping them form companies, incubate companies, and grow them to as large as we can afford to grow them before they are either licensed out to big pharma or acquired by big organizations. In my role as the Chief R&D Officer of Kairos, I supervise deal flow from our partner universities, and I'm proud to say that we have very strong relationships with not only Caltech, but other esteemed institutions in the LA area, such as USC, UCLA, UCI, and also I'm responsible with my team of associates for deal diligence. Looking forward to the discussion. Thank you, Mory.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex. Our first series of questions and for our discussions start with COVID-19. So I would like to know that how COVID-19 actually affect in what our investors are investing, and if so, how? If it has had any impact on even choosing the projects. So it's an open question to all of us, all of you. And if you like, I can pick up one to start with. How about Sean?
Sure, thanks, Mory. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, we have, it really hasn't had a profound effect on what we're doing in terms of our investment approach, strategy, tactics. Obviously, we'll get into the fact that, you know, our portfolio companies are facing operating challenges, of course. But interestingly for us, it hasn't really provided much opportunity, in that one of the few therapeutic areas that we tend not to work on is anti-infectives and vaccines, just because we don't happen to, any of us have any background in that particular area. So we haven't jumped into antivirals or, you know, become the 151st, you know, vaccine company. we've seen that be probably a better place for others to play. There are, of course, some molecules in some of the portfolio companies that are being potentially repurposed and put into COVID trials, but that again has been a small impact. And we haven't really seen it affect, the number or type or nature of the materials that we get sent inbound, to review, pitch decks, that sort of thing. It has had effects on things like our diligence processes and so on, but we'll probably get to that in other questions. But I would say that it really hasn't had a significant impact strategically on us in terms of how we invest.
Well, any other panelists would like to chime in?
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Okay, so this is Gladys from Amgen Ventures. Similar to Sean, like everybody else, it's been a busy year, deal activity wise. It hasn't impacted Amgen Ventures. We're still just as busy. However, Amgen Ventures does invest in the digital health space. So we actually have looked at, as you know, there's been an expansion in the telemedicine space. So we've seen our portfolio companies really expanding, with supporting remote clinical trials due to COVID. And then we're working closely with our portfolio companies and the ones that are collaborating with our organization in helping to monitor the impact of COVID-19 on patient populations. So it's helping us use that data to improve patient treatment. So our digital portfolio is seeing more of an impact. On the therapeutic side, we're strategically not in the antiviral space like a lot of the companies. We do have a separate effort, using our capabilities, but we're not investing in that space. Thank you.
Alex?
Thank you, Mory. Unlike my esteemed co-panelists here, we have taken a little bit of a different approach at Kairos Ventures. COVID-19 is a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. I hope it's once in a lifetime, that we don't have any more pandemics coming on us. We had definitely, as a nation and as the world has suffered from the COVID-19 pandemic, it's clear that we haven't been well prepared to manage the risks of pandemics. And as a result, Kairos Ventures earlier on, but back towards the end of February, beginning of March, we strategically decided that despite the fact that both Sean and my other co-panelists are correct, the inbound deals that we're getting are continuing to be of the same nature as we used to before in number. However, we strategically decided that we need to take an active role in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, and we decided to start investing heavily in both diagnostics to help with the problem of identifying the infected individuals, but also in therapeutics, in how you deal with the problem of infected individuals. So while the universities still produce, and rightly so, the same number of innovations, if not more, than that we used to be accustomed to be seeing, we selectively during this year have been focusing both our financial resources as well as our human capital resources in a number of regards almost exclusively in supporting innovations in the fight against the epidemic. So you will see very soon a tremendous innovation out of Caltech that we have been supporting in the diagnostics domain for a very rapid portable PCR test. You will see announcements from our portfolio companies on the therapeutics front, from other universities, and we will continue to be allocating the majority of our efforts on the fight against the epidemic, because the reality is the effects, not just in terms of the human toll. What is it, close to 200,000 deaths in the United States alone at this point, but also in terms of the toll in our economy has been approaching a devastation not seen since the Great Depression. So we are intent to put our resources, whatever that is in terms of an amount, in the fight against the epidemic in a full force.
Yeah, I think I can, a slightly different perspective is that Alexandria Venture Investment is a strategic arm of our company. And so for us, when COVID hit, I think a lot of companies, you just kind of went into you hunker down mode, and you're like trying to assess how this uncertainty is going to affect your business. We applied that to, internally at Alexandria, but a lot of our portfolio companies, those are questions that we asked. I saw right now we are just as busy, if not busier than before. But I would say that immediately, like in the March-April timeline, there was a slowing in that. I think everyone was just so focused on how to deal with this. But then also we thought, oh, if we hunker down for 6 to 8 weeks, we might come out of this on the other end. And then when we realized that 6 to 8 weeks was not going to do it, a lot of people were tired of being in a holding pattern. So then we started seeing a lot of people kind of the formation of companies that at least were coming to us for space and for capital. But yeah, I think that how a company operates is now part of the question when we think about how we invest in companies. Not just like the type of company, but also like how are they going to address potential long-term impacts of, with trials and all those kinds of things that will become more difficult or has become difficult and may remain to be difficult.
I wonder if, in my case, it's a little bit different from maybe some of the other panelists, that I used to travel quite a bit around the country. I don't know if you guys tend to focus more, for us, San Diego is obviously a pretty rich ecosystem, but we invest nationally. And one of our, angles is that, we don't try to necessarily just build things in our backyard. We really look, for the best across the nation. And so, I do think that the ability, losing the ability to travel and kind of catch up with the different ecosystems around the nation has probably changed, our deal flow a little bit. Obviously the incoming, it's probably the same, but we're pretty proactive about what we're looking for, and so not traveling definitely has probably put a dent in kind of some of the deals that we're trying to find. I remember that, one of the last trips I took actually in late February before we all kind of stayed home was this huge kind of venture organized thing in the mountains. And it's like, that was fantastic because you're getting all these venture capitalists together and they're swapping deals. And it's, a nice way to kind of keep the business going. And it's just one click harder, I think, to do via Zoom. I have seen a lot of groups now saying, hey, we're not doing JP Morgan. We're going to do it digitally next year in January. Let's catch up, right, via Zoom. So that's good. And it's certainly logistically easier. But I do wonder that, some of the magic of the in-person, human connection is gone.
Yeah, I think we're trying to do that. And then the virtual events, we have this platform called the Seed Capital platform, which is to fund early stage, like seed or Series A companies. And it used to be mostly in the East Coast, and the West Coast, people wouldn't necessarily fly over for that one event. But now that we're virtual, we just have it for both coasts. And it's been an interesting experiment. So we're trying to kind of find the silver lining, but I do agree that I think most people enjoy the in-person serendipity of it all.
So I think a follow-up question or the point is that how do you really source these new opportunities? You actively go after these opportunities, or is the balance has changed with COVID-19? I think, Alice, you mentioned that lots of new companies are formed, correct? So these are people approaching you?
Yeah, so I think another positive that's come up is that, yes, because we are more virtual, our team internally, our Alexandria venture investment team, we're scattered around the country. So we're seeing companies form with executives from one city with the technology of another. And so I'm getting deal flow from my colleagues in New York and Boston and San Diego. I've sent companies over to Boston. So we're seeing, so for us, it's actually, we've been, maybe because we don't have that in person, we've been sharing a lot more. I mean, I really like my colleagues, but I think given that we're just growing more comfortable with this whole virtual world, that's where deal flow is coming from. People come to us for capital, people come to us for space. And so one conversation generally leads to the other. And we try to see where there are synergies, but it's not that if you're not a tenant, we won't invest in you, or we invest in all of our tenants. It's kind of an a la carte situation.
So getting back to the rest of the panel, have you also seen a surge of, the entrepreneurs that come to you and they basically have, say, more number of ideas in COVID-19 related than other areas, or have you seen any imbalance?
Look, from our perspective, Mory, we definitely have put the word out that we are seeking to help entrepreneurs with COVID-19 tools against the pandemic. And thus, yes, we have seen a surge of people reaching out to us around COVID-19. In the grand scheme of things, I don't think that there is a huge shift other than an opportunistic shift by PIs in our partner universities. An opportunistic shift meaning they may have a device such as a diagnostic device, a PCR device that applies to some other virus, and then all of a sudden they say, hey, look, this can also apply as an example to SARS-CoV-2. And that's what I mean in terms of opportunistic shift on the overall. But in general, I think on average, it's not that you see a huge shift in terms of the focus of researchers. And this makes sense. Research is a long-term endeavor. It's not something that you pivot on the spot on. When you commit to a line of research, you're committing in effect to 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years of research on that line. And you commit your life on that as a scientist. And thus we don't expect those scientists to shift and pivot as for example, a tech startup would do, shifting, let's say, from being Uber to being Uber Eats or something to that effect. So.
I do think that because, so many companies have been developing new therapeutics in the immuno-oncology space, it's kind of a natural, right, that these companies have to consider whether their therapies would be useful, to boost the immune system against a virus.
Yes.
And as you say, Alex, it's a tough decision because it's, a long-term commitment, and yet, there's a lot of cash that seems to be kind of around right now for promoting that research. But, I do hope that, we don't create this glut that next year, maybe too many people have been working on COVID. So it'll be interesting to watch.
Indeed.
Yeah, the number of companies that started around building ventilators, correct? And this thing is shifting and all the time. And one area is that I'm basically concerned is that we hear about this side effects or things that are lingering for 3 months or 4 months for people even recovered. And the areas that, also, in terms of life sciences, we can help those people too. It's going to be a tsunami of these people. And I was wondering if, you have seen also in this secondary kind of diagnostics or therapeutics, surge in terms of entrepreneurs that are approaching you. Alex mentioned a little bit about it, but I think that number of heart problems, heart failures, and kidney failure, the respiratory issues, those are all coming up, and you can, just watch the news every night. They say, okay, this guy, recovered 2 months ago, 3 months ago, still he couldn't breathe, or he has hard time to walk. They from cardiomyopathy to the infections, still following it. They are not directly related to COVID-19. I think we need to also have open mind in terms of investment in areas that can help life of these people. Any comments, any issue?
I agree, Mory. What we have seen is, as Nancy mentioned, is folks have been doing research in areas that are now very much so relevant to the COVID-19 epidemic. As an example, a lot of folks that do research on ARDS, acute respiratory disease syndrome, which is obviously very relevant to the therapy that you can apply to a subset of the population infected by the virus. We see a lot of those, what I would call mini pivots, where, for example, folks are saying, say, look, I'm producing an antiviral, and now I'm going to be focusing it on SARS-CoV-2 for obvious reasons. There's a lot of opportunity, financial, but also opportunity to do good. So that's we do see this. I don't think that we will have a surge in such a way that's going to create a glut that's meaningful to us as VCs or scientific community at large. Meaning it's not that all of a sudden, once we have gotten rid of the pandemic, hopefully sometime soon, maybe sometime next year, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden we will have no innovations to invest in. Quite the contrary. The innovations that I see from our partner universities are coming hard and fast. You folks at universities are working very, very hard, especially during this period. And I think there's going to be tremendous opportunity to invest in great things in the near and far future. I'm not too concerned about the glut, but yes, there has been an uptick on COVID-related opportunities for the obvious reasons, the same way that we decided to allocate our resources on COVID-19. Scientists do the same thing, as well as the government does the same thing. There is now an approval process, an EUA, an authorization process, I should call it, that it is significantly shortened compared to anything else that existed previously. And thus, everybody has reacted to focus on the epidemic, but I don't think that after we deal with the epidemic, the pandemic, we will be in trouble. There is no glut per se that needs to be drained before we can invest in other meaningful innovations.
Gladys?
This is Gladys. I was just going to say, I think we're all learning, and as we're learning more and more about the pandemic and the treatments and the responses, like you said, there's more that we can do. And sometimes it may not be an investment. Like I said, we don't invest in antivirals, but sometimes when we've been approached, we're happy to maybe connect them to a network that we know about that may help with grant applications or maybe other investors that are in that space. Clearly, like Alex said, this is something that some of the changes that have been made are going to stay with the healthcare system. So I think it's an opportunity to learn and just improve patient care overall. So an investment may not be the most kind of like just solution to everything.
Sean, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I do think that with the numbers of people infected worldwide, that is likely to occur just, from a denominator perspective, the numbers are going to be huge. Some people will be successfully vaccinated, of course, but around the globe, there'll be plenty of people who get naturally infected with this virus before they have the opportunity to be vaccinated. And I think that, there will be long-term health consequences of that in the cardiopulmonary system and others, neurologic and so on. These are not necessarily particularly common, but when you have the denominator as large as it is, it doesn't need to be common to generate fairly large absolute values of people who are having compromised health. And that will become an issue and potentially an unmet need, going forward. I imagine that it's just going to take some time, of course, for us to really understand, to what extent do things like the lung damage that some people experience, how much does that actually resolve over time and those sorts of things. before we can really understand if there's an unmet need that can't be addressed with existing, therapeutic or interventions of various kinds. But I don't think it's absurd to think that a year down the road from now, we could be recognizing that there are populations of patients who have problems that are not currently addressable with existing therapeutics. That's a valid perspective in my mind.
One of the issues that has been brought up to our attention is that, telemedicine now is becoming very attractive because people's basically they're not interested to visit, the doctors or hospitals. So have you seen any change or shift in number of entrepreneurs or technologies approaching you to ask for investment into telemedicine?
Oh, sorry, this is Gladys. I'm moving around, sorry. So our portfolio companies have kind of really expanded more into telemedicine. They were more on the way. What COVID did was really get the regulatory agencies, as you saw, the FDA put some emergency approvals in place to better enable telemedicine to the patient community, and companies that were already had filed for approval, got approval, got the emergency approval. I think that happened in April. And it really kind of helped to enable both the healthcare provider as well as the companies to support the patient population. Now, the question is how are the regulators going to make that available? To your point, if patients like it and will keep using it, they will want to continue accessing it.
Any other panelists would like to chime in on this?
I mean, we don't invest in services yet, but it's definitely an area that we've been watching. It's obviously kind of going to be the way of the future. We've been mostly focused on, therapeutics that might be delivered, via digital kind of platforms. So I think any progress in this space, is probably a good thing to kind of, modernize the way we do stuff. So.
Well, I think that we ask all the questions we can ask that related to COVID-19. So I'm opening up to a more general question that, again, is important to academics, like myself. And so I would like to hear advice of your group on to new startups coming out of academia, and what are the main pitfalls that you have seen overall that just new startups? And in that respect, or related to that, at what stage they should approach the outside investors? That's the question. I would like to open up the discussion to that. Maybe
I can speak to some of it. So prior to joining Alexandria, I worked at the Harvard Innovation Lab, which was an innovation center for the entire university and its affiliated hospital. So I came from the perspective of working with entrepreneur in an academic setting. And I think even when I was there, but even more so now that I've kind of stepped out of that world, is that as scientists, we think of competition as people doing exactly what we're doing. Because of course, getting scooped is like the most devastating thing that can happen to any, young scientist. But in this world of when you're trying to address some unmet need, it doesn't really matter what the solution is as long as it fixes the problem. So the way you think about competition needs to broaden dramatically. And so we'll hear a lot of the time, it's like, well, no one else is doing what I'm doing. But that's not how you should be thinking about it. You need to take a step back and really kind of understand the context in which you are trying to kind of push this thing forward. And then also be honest with yourself that if there is a superior technology or solution, that you don't spend more time, because money is one thing, right? Of course, you're talking to investors, which would provide capital, but your time is something that you cannot get back. So being critical in assessing whether or not this is how you want to spend, like when someone was saying like, you're dedicating not the next year of your life, you're dedicating the next 5, 10, well, a long, long time. And is it the best way to spend your time? So that's kind of one observation that I had from before that I hope that people don't have to like live through it to learn it.
I would definitely second that, Alice, because, part of, the challenge of being a judge on some of these pitch competitions is always asking the same question of like, so tell me more about your competition. I always look for the competitive landscape slide, and, these early stage efforts have to be able to at least have a theoretical advantage to people that are ahead. So, it's another research project, really, understanding who's already out there, and, hopefully, enough has happened in that space where there are mistakes that you could learn from and improve on. The other thing I would mention in terms of kind of research that some of these startups could do is researching the venture capital community, which I know maybe not always be that easy, but as you said, Mory, it's a question of efficiency, right? How best to spend your time. And a lot of times people are kissing the wrong frog, right? I mean, you have to kind of know, and a lot of it is by looking at people's portfolios, where they've invested, where they've been successful and have the mandate to continue investing. We have a few, really nice stories in our portfolio where it's like, yeah, Alicos is our poster child. It was a, spin out from Johns Hopkins. It was, a lot of novel biology, but an old school antibody approach. I would love to find the next Alicos. And so if somebody has, an old school antibody, or hopefully a freezer full of them, but a really cool novel target that can address not only some orphan diseases, but then maybe some huge indications as an upside, that's exactly what I'm looking to repeat. So doing research on who you're talking to and how to best, use your valuable time picking the right investors to hear your story. So those are a couple of things I would encourage people to focus on.
So actually, maybe I rephrase the question a little bit. How much or how long do you think that this academic researchers should keep the research in university, and at what stage they should start thinking about whether they should translate this out? I mean, Sean, it seems that you're interested.
Yeah, Mory, that's a great question, and I think there really is a gap still in this process. We have terrific early discovery research kind of activities that are grant funded in the universities, and they take projects a certain way down the road. But even when the investigators become interested in developing therapeutic interventions on a particular drug target, for example, the work that gets done, again, tends to only go kind of so far. And unfortunately, that place that often the technology is brought to, whether it's almost independent of the modality, but certainly we see this in small molecules, antibodies, et cetera, that there is a capability to do the work in-house at the university, but it's done very early. So like screening and kind of hit to lead, you might get a little bit of lead optimization done. And you're still sort of too far from the clinic for many of the venture capitalists to want to invest. And there needs to be a bridge of some sort. And that I've seen happen through, in some cases, investigators get these grants that allow them to actually spin the technology out of the university into a very small laboratory based companies, with like 2 employees kind of set up. And we sometimes have found those outfits to be very attractive because they've managed to apply resources that come from those grants to advancing, let's say, the chemistry, if it's a small molecule chemistry, to a point where you're maybe 2 or 3 years at the most from IND. When it gets longer than that, at least for us, it's not really the sweet spot. And so we're typically looking for things that are closer. So one way to get to bridge that gap is to create this very small company kind of environment using the grants that exist for that. I don't recall the names of the grants, but there are NIH grants and other grants that are set up specifically for that purpose. The other model seems to be, an internal seed funds that are available at the universities. And there's more of this happening all the time, where there's some kind of internal competition in the university. Sometimes they bring folks like myself in to help them prioritize and choose what to put those seed funds into. And there's some money available to do some of the work that needs to be done, using some CROs to do certain things, to advance programs, therapeutics a little bit further along, so that, again, you can kind of get into this zone where you're within striking distance of, an IND within a 2 or at the most 3-year type of time frame. And I still don't think our systems are very good. And I know these comments are very specific to, human therapeutics development, but that's really kind of all we do. It may be very different in device and diagnostics land. But for human therapeutics, we see this over and over again, that things are just too early for us to get involved. Some VCs will put seed funding into these sort of things and be very, very patient and fund these very early efforts. But that's pretty high risk activity to engage in. And we tend not to do that as much. So I think that's the big gap, and that's something that we need to address in the ecosystem, is better ways to help to bridge that gap.
I think another way of thinking about engagement is that I don't think you need to necessarily wait. Like I personally have suggested to the companies I've worked with to go talk to folks before you're necessarily raising money. Because a lot of times they're like, it's not ready, it's not ready, it's not ready. And then you go and you think you've done all the right things, and all the investors are asking for entirely different things. So if you're going to talk to folks, for me, it's about setting expectations that you're not walking out of that first meeting with any sort of check, right? But if you're like, help them understand where you're thinking and do the homework, right? The competitive landscape, all those things you should do. And then so when you walk in the door, you're like, hey, this is what I think. These are the things I've learned. And then it gives someone to react. I've had a number of people just come to me like, is this a good idea? And I'm like, well, you tell me, like, why do you think this is a good idea? I'll ask you questions, whether you may be able to answer it, you may not. And if you can't, then maybe that's more work to be done. But I would suggest engaging earlier. There are a lot of investors that are looking to understand these kind of like the cutting edge technologies that may eventually spin out. And it's also about relationships, right? If you look at this investment thing as purely a transaction, I don't think that in the long run, it's going to benefit you as an entrepreneur or your company as a whole. And also the next efforts, right? Like for us, it's connecting with smart, ambitious people who want to do something cool. Not everything's going to be successful, but likely they're going to go and do something else that's interesting. So for us, it's always a long-term view on, who is within our network and relationships.
Any other comments on that? Maybe I can make from my own experience. So we are basically at Caltech. We have this internal fund, as Sean mentioned. It's called RI Squared, and which its purpose is to make sure that technology is improved and become mature enough in order even to go outside. But one of the things that we are trying to do with our STEM, excited colleagues that they come and they want to start a startup is that ask some critical questions in the university level before they go out and, find out the bad news. Like, for example, lots of times they mix up FDA approval with reimbursement. I mean, they think because you get FDA approval, you're getting reimbursed. No, the business model has nothing to do with you get approval or not. I mean, the point is that, they should be educated. And that's very important. So some of universities, to have such plans in place that make sure that, do I need to do that? Maybe I just want to, give the rights to a much bigger company that they can do it. Or do I have enough time and willing to spend time on that area? So I think it's very important from the business side, also universities to educate their entrepreneurs. Okay, so one last question was that, getting back to business, is that do a small startup, should they start thinking from beginning of having a business person on board? Is it something that they're going to benefit from it during the course of, because most of the CEOs of the companies are postdocs or recent graduates that they jump out, correct? And they learn by making mistakes. So how much do you think it has value to it to have a business person on board from day one? Any suggestions or comments?
I've seen a lot of successful academics team up with advisors. I wouldn't say that you need a full-time person. In fact, a lot of times, the VC actually likes to be the first business person there that can kind of staff the company with their, favorite jockeys. And I have had, a few times where it's like, oh, this was kind of an interesting asset. Not so sure about the team. That wasn't necessarily a positive, right? But I think it's exactly what Alice said, talk to a lot of people, try to learn from a lot of people. The fit really has to be there. And I wouldn't want to encourage academics to hook up with a business person just because we quote unquote need one. Really has to be the right person with the right vision that's well aligned with, the founder's interests. So I think, having experienced advisors is awesome though, because they can really tell you how it's been done, right? And what pitfalls to avoid. So that's my.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Nancy. Go ahead. No, this is Gladys. I was just going to say that I agree with all the comments. You don't necessarily need a business person on the team. Tapping into that network early is very, very important. Take advantage of your advisors. Even ask them who else should they speak to. I think it was Alice that said earlier that maybe even if the opportunity is not fully ready, they should start networking that. At Amgen, the seed fund is really led and championed by the scientists. So, that's another avenue there. Scientist to scientist engagement really helps to prioritize these opportunities for investments as you're bringing that expertise to the table. So, like everybody's saying, small companies don't necessarily need, or startups need to have a formal business person on board.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think the comment Nancy made about, it's not that infrequent that we see these early companies that instead of having, kind of the founders at the academic center be the temporary CEO, CSO, or what have you, they've actually brought in people to do these various roles. And it can be quite problematic from the perspective that they're often not the professional management team that you would want if you were going to actually put, a Series A level funding behind the company. And you're going to have to deal with that. You're going to have to, sometimes it's overtly the case that these are placeholder temporary people, but in other cases, it's not the case, and you're having to immediately imagine how you're going to have to, what you're going to do with these people who really, you know, are either not needed because it won't be for years. So you need that kind of a business development type person, or, you know, the person who's going to be the CEO doesn't have the right technical background or experience to be the CEO, but it's their baby and they have some equity now. And, you know, so it can really complicate the picture. And I think it's better not to build a management team if you can't build the right management team. It's better to just hold off, keep the asset, move the focus on the program and the science, and avoid staffing up. You know, even if you do this spin out that I mentioned earlier and create a small company, that should be like a couple chemists. You know, that shouldn't be a management team that you're going to end up having to deal with replacing down the road. Because a lot of times they just are not the right industry experienced C-suite people hanging around the university environment, depending on the university where it's located. You just can't be found easily, and wherever the company is going to be built is, you know, going to be where the talent is. You know, that's a big driver of where we build companies.
Well, I've been given signal by Andy that I have to wrap it up. So any final quick comments by the panels? Really, you have been great, and it was very good discussion. I learned a lot. Thank you. If there's no other final comments, I would like to hand it to Andy. And thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mory and Nancy and Alex and Gladys and Sean. And by the way, I'm just thinking on the last question. I know Caltech has a great success with an EIR program, which provides kind of more formalized kind of consulting, because sometimes advisors can be not as reliable. And I think that's a good hybrid model. So I was just thinking in that conversation, that's probably worth considering. But once again, thank you all for the great panel. What a tremendous way to end our first day at First Look SoCal. The wisdom of these investors and Mory's experience, I think it's a tremendous combination. So thank you all for that. Today was our Life Sciences Day. So we're kind of at the halfway point. And it was a terrific day. I was just once again so impressed by the companies and the science. And I was communicating with Matt Bresnahan just about the quality of First Look companies this year. And we agreed that it set a super high standard, and congratulations to all the teams. But tomorrow we have another exciting day. It starts at 9 a.m. We'll have a brief welcome from Gene Sykes, who is the board chair of the Southern California Alliance. Gene was critical in bringing the Olympics here and ran the tech banking for Goldman Sachs. Is a great supporter of our work at the Alliance and bringing the region together. So we're excited to have him do a quick welcome, but we'll quickly transition to Alan Jacobson, who is the Chief Data Analytics Officer of Alteryx. And if you don't know Alteryx, they are in Irvine. They're a publicly traded company. Market cap's about $8 billion. And they operate one of the leading analytics and AI machine learning platforms in the country. Alan's going to talk about some of the innovation opportunities in AI. And that, of course, will be followed by 15 companies in the tech space. Curious to see how they stack up to the amazing life sciences companies we had today. And we'll end tomorrow, just like we ended today, with an esteemed panel of venture capital investors who cover the tech space. So once again, thank you all to our companies. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our judges. Get some rest. We have another day tomorrow for those who are interested in the life sciences space. And once again, want to acknowledge the great support of our partners, Lava, in this event, and our key underwriters, Alexandria Real Estate and Wilson Sonsini. With that, I'll sign off and look forward to seeing you all at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.